Hello, 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 hello. It's your boy Johan, and welcome to, if not, welcome back to the channel. I'm gonna do another soft spoken reading from the Book of Norse Myths. This time, focusing on another god of the Asgardian pantheon, and this time we will be doing the Legends of Thor. I hope you enjoy, sit down, relax, take a load off. If you're gonna go and sleep, get comfortable. If you're gonna relax, get in a relaxing position. So, with no further ado, with all further ado, what even is that phrase? Without further delay, I could say, I guess. Let's begin. Legends of Thor. I am the Thunderer. Here in my Northland, my fastness and fortress reign forever. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Saga of the King Olaf. Thor was one of the 12 principal deities of Asgard, and he lived in the splendid realm of through the Vang. I am going to butcher quite a few of these names. I will correct myself if I pick them up. I don't intend to do a lot of edits and cuts and stuff. I want this to be off of the cuff, so to speak, as a way to also improve my dictation, because this initially started off as me trying to get a little bit better at speaking aloud and speaking, I guess, for an audience, even though, I don't actually have an audience here. But here we go. Legends of Thor. Thor was one of the 12 principal deities of Asgard. He lived in the splendid realm of Thrudvang, where he built a palace called Bilskirnir. Here he lived as god of thunder, and his name was invoked more than any other in the age of the Vikings. For Thor was the protector of the land, a fine figure of a man with glowing eyes, firm muscles, and a red beard that made him instantly recognizable. See that? Red beard. Thor has a red beard. He's not blonde. Don't let Marvel deceive you. Yeah. Loki, well, as you all knew from the last book, Loki also had red hair. He became known across the worlds for his great hammer, Mjolnir the Crusher, which had been forged by the Dark Elves. This hammer, together with Thor's strength and his terrible temper, made him the fiercest god of Asgard, and the personification of brute force. Thor was also god of might and war, and because of his popularity, he soon grew to embody the forces of agriculture and became a symbol of the earth itself. He is remembered throughout the world on the fourth day of the week, Thursday, or Thor's Day. I'm sure a lot of people don't even know that most of the days of our weeks are named after the Norse pantheon. I can't remember who Monday is named after. Tuesday's Thursday. Wednesday's Odin's Day. Thursday's Thursday. Friday, I think Friday is Freya's Day. And Saturday and Sunday, I'm assuming a Saturn. I can't remember. I know quite a few of them are not Asgardian, but I may be wrong. You can correct me in the comments. How Thor got his hammer. First, Thor with a bent brow, in red beard, muttering low, darting fierce lightnings from his eyeballs blow. I totally messed that up. First Thor with a bent brow, in red beard, muttering low, darting fierce lightning from eyeballs that blow, comes while each chariot's wheel echoes in thunder peal, and his dread hammer shook, makes earth and heaven rock, clouds rifting above while earth quakes below. Thor was married to Sif, whose long golden hair was her one great pride. It fell to her feet like a ray of sunlight, and it was the color of ripe corn silk in summer fields. As she brushed it, it glinted in the light and became a symbol of great beauty across Asgard. One day, the glistening cascade of hair caught the eye of Loki. Oh no, not again, not again. One day, the glistening cascade of hair caught the eye of Loki, and he wondered then how he ever could have imagined living without it. This man is a sprung. There's a name for people like Loki where I come from. We just call them pipers. And no, not even pipers. Pipers steal on necessity. We call them a sprangabends. But I'm sure nobody has heard that phrase other than a while. Sprangabends, as we see in sprangabends, as see people having things and just say, I want that too. One day, the glistening cascade of her hair caught the eye of Loki, and he wondered then how he ever could have imagined living without it. He thought about the hair all day and all through the night, and then, just as the moon reached her pinnacle in the midnight sky, Loki leapt to his feet and made for Sif's bedchamber, where he knew he would find her sleeping. The moon cast long shadows into the sleeping goddess's delicately furnished room, and it was easy for the fleet-footed Loki to steal in and set to work. Loki crept to the side of Sif's bed and very gently, so that he did not disturb her. He withdrew a pair of great shears from his cloak and cut her long veil of hair from her head, winding the tresses down around his arms. He darted from the room once again, and there was silence, until, that is, Sif awoke to discover the travesty that had occurred. Her shrieks brought everyone in the kingdom running to her side, and Thor howled with such outrage that the entire kingdom of Asgard shook. It was not long before Loki was ferreted out and brought before the irate god. Thunder boomed in the sky as the shaking trickster fell to his knees before Thor. "I beg you, Thor," he cried, "let me free, and I will find a new head of hair for Sif, one that is even more beautiful than the one she has now. I'll go to the Dark Elves, they'll fashion one." Loki's head bobbed up and down with fright, and eventually Thor gave it, "Nah, man. They just give in to this man way too easily. They give in to this man way too easily. He be out here bamboozling them left and right and left and right. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please give me another chance. I swear it was a mistake. I'll never do it again. I'll make it up to you." Like, and they fall for that chain up. It's sad. You have 20 hours to come forth with the tresses. And if you fail, Loki, you will be removed from Asgard forever. Thor banged down a thunderbolt at Loki's feet, and the traitor scampered hastily away, hardly daring to breathe as at his good fortune. Loki traveled at once to the center of the earth, down to Svartalfheim, 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 Svartalfheim. Loki traveled at once to the center of the earth, down into Svartalfheim, where the willy-wily dwarf Dvalin had his home. He threw himself on the mercy of the dwarf and requested, as well as 2 gifts, with which he could win the favor of Odin and Frey, who were bound to hear of the news and wished to punish him themselves. Dvalin worked over the heat of his forge for many hours, and as he worked, he chanted the words which would make all he forged the finest there was. For there are no arms as powerful nor invincible as those fashioned by dwarves. First he finished the spear, Gungnir. First he finished the spell Gungnir, which would always hit its mark. Next, he formed a ship. Skibbity-dibbity. Okay, I'm joking. Next, he formed the ship Skiblanir. The ship Skiblanir, which would always find wind on even the most silent of seas, and which could sail through the air as well as on water. The ship was folded carefully and placed in a tiny compass. Loki's eyes shone at its undoubted worth. Finally, Dvalin spun the most graceful of golden threads, and these he wove into the head of hair so lustrous and shining that all the dark elves gasped at its beauty. Dvalin handed it carefully to Loki, wrapped in the softest of tissues, and said, "As soon as this touches your princess's head, it shall grow there and become as her own." This dwarf have a different kind of Obia dog, I swear. Loki took all the gifts from Dvalin, who he thanked profusely, and feeling very pleased with himself, he set off for Asgard with a skip in his step. His jauntiness attracted the attention of 2 dwarfs who sat by the side of a small cottage. "Why do you smile so?" asked the first, for Loki's reputation had preceded him, and the dwarfs were certain that his happiness could have no virtuous cause. Vivaldi. Vivaldi, boasted Loki, is the most clever of smiths. What do you mean, Vivaldi? His name is Dvalin. You changing the man's name? Vivaldi, boasted Loki, is the most clever of smiths, both here and in all the 9 worlds. And with that, he held up his prizes for the dwarfs to examine. "Psh," said the first dwarf, who was called Broki. "My brother Sindri can fashion gifts that are far more beautiful than those. Ooh, Brok and Sindri. Now I know where those names in the God of War game come from. Brok and Sindri. My brother Sindri can fashion gifts that are far more beautiful than those, and sturdier too. He paused, and then continued, leaning towards Loki, who began to look rather put out. Our gifts would hold the magic of the very center of the earth, he whispered. Loki choked, and then recovering himself, immediately challenged the dwarf to prove his words. So confident was he of the gifts he held now that he placed a wager on his own head. And so it was that Broki and Sindri made their way into their smithy and began work on the hottest of forges. Sindri agreed to fashion the goods on the condition that Broki blew the bellows, a task which would prove difficult over the great heat that was necessary for Sindri to win the wager. Sindri at once threw some gold into the fire and left the room, eager to invoke the powers which would be invested in the great wild boar, which he had decided upon for free. Alone with the roaring fire, Broki worked hard at the bellows, never pausing despite the tremendous heat. Loki watched from the window, and as he observed the determination and strength of the dwarf, he began to grow uneasy. Oh no, you know what that means. Some trickery is afoot, some treachery is afoot, some Loki bullshit is afoot. At once, he decided that he must intervene, and as quick as a flash of light, he turned himself into a glad fly and alighted on the hand of Broki, where he set the stinger so deep that the rush of blood rose to the surface immediately. Broki cried out in pain, but he continued the bellowing, never missing a beat. Sindri returned to the room and drew from the fire an enormous boar, who they called, ooh, that's a name, Gulin Bursti. Gulin Bursti. Gulin Bursti. Gulin Bursti. Gulin Bursti. That's a name. Gulin Bursti. For its radiant golden bristles. This boar would have the strength of all other boars there were, but he would have the additional ability to shine a rich and powerful light into any part of the world in which he traveled. He was the perfect gift for the sun god Frey, and nothing could match the brilliance of its light but the sun god himself. So Sindri flung more gold into the fire and instructed Broki to continue to blow. Once again, he left the room to seek the necessary enchantment, and once again, Loki did some bullshit. And once again, Loki took on the form of a gladfly. In an instant, he had landed on Broki's cheek and stung through the wetted skin. I messed that up. So once again, he left the room to seek the necessary enchantment, and once again, Loki took the form of a gladfly. In an instant, he had landed on Broki's cheek and stung through the wetted skin until Broki cried out and turned white with pain. But still he worked on, pumping the bellows, until Sindri returned once more. And triumphant, Sindri drew from the fire a ring which he called Drapinir, 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 which would become the very symbol of fertility. For on every ninth night, 8 identical rings would drop from Drapnir with powers to match. That reminds me of a Magic the Gathering card. The final gift was yet to be prepared, and this time Sindri threw iron onto the fire, leaving Brocky hard at work as he left to call upon the final spirits. Brocky's strength was beginning to flag, but his will was as strong as ever. He pumped away at the fire burner, brighter and brighter, until suddenly a horsefly lit on his cheek and stung him with the ferocity that caused him to leap into the air. But still he did not miss even one pump of the bellows. Loki was becoming desperate. He arranged himself on the forehead of the hapless dwarf, and he stung straight into a vein on his forehead that throbbed with effort. He was rewarded by a gush of blood that streamed out into the fire and into Brocky's eyes. The dwarf raised his hand for a split second to wipe the blood, but that moment caused damage that could not be erased. When Sindri returned and drew out the great hammer, its handle was short and ungainly. Brocky hung his head in disappointment, but Sindri pointed out that the powers of the great hammer would more than make up for its small size. Indeed, he thought it might be an advantage, in that it could be neatly hidden in a man's tunic. So Brocky gathered up all the gifts and carried them outside to Loki, who accompanied the dwarf back to Asgard with his booty. Odin was given the ring Draupnir, Frey was given the bow Gullinbursti, and Thor was given the hammer, which they had named Mjolnir, meaning invincible power. Loki then presented Sif with her golden hair, and when she placed it upon her shorn head, it latched itself there and began to grow in the swirls and waves until it reached the feet once more, a shining veil of hair that shone more brightly than ever. Gungnir, the spear, was given to Odin, and the ship Skibidi-Dibidi-Doo-Bye and the ship Skidbladnir to Frey. Each god was delighted with his gift, and there was much camaraderie as they slapped the backs of the dwarves and the redeemed Loki. It was Brocky who put a stop to the celebrations when he stepped forward and explained the wager that had been made by Loki. The gods looked at one another and eyed their magnificent gifts. Although it was agreed that Sif's hair could not be more lustrous or more beautiful, the gods announced that Brocky's gifts were the finest and the most magical, for the sole reason that Thor's great hammer was of such a magnificent size that it could be hidden away and used against the frost giants at a moment's notice. Loki's games had backfired, and he turned on his heels and fled before Brocky could undertake his part of the bargain and behead him. They should have get him. Brocky started in outrage and implored Thor to come to his rescue in catching Loki, who was making away at all speed. Still smarting from Sif's agony, Thor threw out a lightning bolt and caught Loki by the ankles, returning him to face his fate at the hands of Brocky and his brother. But when Loki was delivered to the dwarfs, Thor took pity on Loki and insisted to Brocky that he could have Loki's head, but that he must not touch his neck, for the neck of Loki belonged to him. What bamboozlement! What dishonor! But then again, what is dishonor among gods? What is honor among gods? One thing I love about the Norse pantheon, and well, a lot of other pantheons, is they don't pretend to be anything more than human. They are very human, sometimes the worst of humanity. For the neck of Loki belonged to him. Thor, of course, there was no way to remove a head without touching the adjoining neck, and Brocky stomped around in fury before he came up with a plan which would serve him equally. Gathering his brother's great awl for the purpose, he punched holes along Loki's lips and stitched them together with an unbreakable cord. It was many days before Loki's howls of pain ceased, and many more before he was able to unstitch the cord. Loki did not speak for almost 100 days, and his torn lips were so painful he could not bear to move them. In time, however, Loki was able to speak once again, causing Thor and everyone in Asgard to rue the day that the wager was broken. You see, lesson learned. Let the man suffer for his decisions. Let him lie in the bed that he made. Look, this man named Loki, I swear. Story number 2. Thor goes fishing. On the dark bottom of the great salt lake, imprisoned lay the giant snake, with North his sullen sleep to break. Thor was a great traveler, and it was in his capacity for war. Thor was a great traveler, and it was in his capacity of war god that he took it upon himself to keep an eye on the activities of the occupants of the other worlds. One day, bored of his battles against the giants, he decided to take one more dangerous opponent, the world serpent, Jormungandr. How he longed to have the horns and the head of the great beast on the walls of his palace hall. That is technically his nephew, though, because Jormungandr is supposed to be the son of Loki. So that's technically his nephew. Man want to cut off his nephews. What is wrong with these people? And so it was that Thor dressed himself one morning in the attire of a human, trimming and cutting and curling his magnificent red beard until he looked the picture of elegance and gentility. He left Midgard and sailed across the sea until he reached Jotunheim. He anchored his ship, and with his belongings tied upon a massive back, he set off across the sandy shores. A day or two later, he reached the cabin of the giant Hymir, who was not pleased to see an unexpected visitor. Hymir knew that customs called for him to welcome the seafarer, but he had lived alone for many years and he disliked company. "There's no point in resting your head on this household," he said curtly at Thor, "for I am up at the crack of the early light to go fishing. And then for the remainder of the day, I have to see to my herd." Hymir was the owner of a magnificent herd of steer, and he tended them zealously, allowing no one to interrupt his duties. He hoped that he would put off the unexpected visitor by being too busy to entertain him or to provide him with a comfortable bed. But Thor was not to be dissuaded. Continuing to allow the giant to believe that he was nothing more than a traveling man, Thor laughed and said that he would enjoy very much accompanying the giant on his fishing expedition, in the hopes that he would learn something from his skills. And so it was that Hymir grudgingly allowed Thor into his hut and showed him a room where he could lay his head. The first light of morning found Hymir preparing to set out for the river, which roared along the bottom of his property towards the sea. It seems that the animals of my neighborhood are warring. I hope that my mic is not picking it up because I'm hearing it and it sounds like quite a battle. The first light of morning found Ymir preparing to set out for the river, which roared along the bottom of his property towards the sea. He moved quietly as not to awaken the traveler. He had no interest in or intention of taking him fishing, and he wanted to be gone before Thor wakened. Slipping silently from the cottage, he moved towards the cattle, which he planned to milk before setting out in his boat. He was dismayed to find Thor waiting for him, patiently stroking one of the cattle. "You will be fishing next, I imagine," said Thor with a wide grin. "I fish alone," said Ymir curtly. "I'd like to join you," said Thor. This man bold-faced. But then again, Thor has always been bold-faced. "No room for passengers," said Ymir again, moving to work on the first cow. "Not as a passenger," said Thor with a smile. "As a fisherman, I'll help you with the rowing." Ymir could see that Thor was intent upon joining him, and so he nodded grudgingly and pointed towards the manure heap. "Find yourself some bait then," he said with a grunt. Now Thor had seen the giant gesticulating towards the cattle, who lounged over the manure heap. With a mighty blow of his sword, he beheaded one of the finest there and held it up to show Ymir, blood dripping down his arm. But what the whole mother? The giant could hardly control his rage. He had intended Thor to dig for grubs, not behead one of his sacred cattle. But he said nothing. "I'll lose him at sea," he thought to himself. No, I was fighting. You just cut off my. No, I was fighting him. I might have lost, but I was fighting him because that is. No. Ugh. But then again, what I know of Thor from Norse mythology, he was always an asshole. Eventually, the two men set out in the boat and they began to row. Ymir had noticed Thor's carefully curled beard and assumed he was not the most manly of men, perhaps unaccustomed to the rigors of fishing and farming. He was greatly surprised when Thor took the oars and rowed with splendid ease for hours without showing any sign of fatigue. At last, Ymir begged him to stop, pointing out that the best fishing spots were around them. But Thor carried on rowing, intent on reaching the place where the Jormungandr lived. Oh, this mother. He set him up. This was his plan all along. But Thor carried on rowing, intending on reaching the place where Jormungandr lived. He rowed for an hour, and then Ymir leaned forward and put his hand on his oar. "You must stop here," he said, "for we have reached the waters where Jormungandr swims. Any further and we will attract his attention and be his first meal for the day." Thor brightened at the news and rowed steadily until he was certain that they were in the waters of the evil serpent. Then he carefully chose the strongest of Ymir's rods and reels. My fridge just came back on. I hope the camera is not picking it up. I really do. And placed the line as thick as his forearm on the rod. He placed his tackle on the great hook and he let it fall into the water. It was only moments before there was a stirring of the water and Thor felt his rod being pulled from his grasp. In the dark reaches of the sea, Jormungandr had spied the head of the slain cattle and taken it in one bite. Now the sturdy hook was trapped in its throat, and he thrashed and shrieked as he tried to dislodge it. Thor stood firmly on the boat, his determination making him strong. He called upon the divine powers that made him godly, and he drew in the writhing beast as if it were no more than a fish on a simple rod. Ymir sat back aghast. He knew now that his passenger could be no man. He had never seen such strength, such resolve. And when the serpent was drawn forth from the water, spitting poison and snarling, he turned yellow and fell into a deep faint. For Jormungandr was a frightening sight to behold, with massive teeth, huge bulging eyes, and a deathly oath that spoke of all who had fallen at its will. Thor held it tightly to his rod, muscles groaning with effort. The huge body of the serpent lashed the water into a frenzied current, and the boat tossed and tipped, water filling the bottom and then emptying once again with each terrible wave that passed. Ymir came to and could take no more. Swiftly he leant forward and grabbed his sharp knife, sawing through Thor's line with all the force he could muster, and then there was silence. The Jormungandr slipped silently into the black depths of the sea and disappeared. Thor's roar was heard far away in Asgard, and his fury caused a great storm to erupt. He had been just about to draw the beast into the ship when robbed of his quarry. The serpent would not be such easy prey from now on. The strip had been wasted. I messed that up. Thor's roar was heard far away in Asgard, and his fury caused a great storm to erupt. He had been just about to draw in the beast into the ship when robbed of his quarry. The serpent would not be such easy prey from now on, and his trip had been wasted. He snarled at the giant, and, withdrawing his hammer, gave him a blow that sent him flying into the icy waters, never to be seen again. But what the whole mother? This man, Pester, an unsuspecting fisherman, Pester him, killed one of his precious cattle, bamboozled him into the waters of a dangerous creature. And what are you talking about? You want to reel it onto the ship? Jormungandr is the world serpent. His body is so long that it can wrap around the world. I don't know if this is probably a younger version of Jormungandr, but even though this is a giant ship, no, that's crazy. And on top of that, you killed the man? Norse gods again, yes? Some say it was a blessing that Thor did not catch the world serpent on that day, for a prophecy had been made that if ever the Jormungandr's tail were removed from its mouth, the perpetrator would suffer a curse that would hang over him until the rest of his days. Thor rode steadily until he reached the shore, and within a day he was back in Asgard. He did not speak of the fishing expedition again. This is hilarious. This is hilarious. A Thor in the Hall of the Giants. The strong-armed Thor, full oft against Jotunheim did wend, but spite his belt celestial, spite his gauntlet, Utgard Loki, still his throne retains, evil itself a force, to force yields never. That poem not pouring in, well, to me anyway. Thor had planned one of his regular trips to Jotunheim. And he set out on this occasion with Loki. It had not been many months since Loki had shown Sif's here, and Thor decided that it was safer for all if Loki was under his own keen eye. So it was that they set out in Thor's chariot, and as night fell, they came upon the hut of a peasant where they requested a bed for the night. The peasant lived in a small hut with his wife and 2 children, and although they did not have much food to spare, they offered it all to Thor, who ate greedily. It soon became clear that there was not anywhere near enough food for all, so Thor took his own 2 goats from the stable where he'd put them for the night and slew them, roasting them over the coals of the peasant's hearth until the succulent meat slipped from the bones. He threw down his cloak on the floor and requested that the bones be placed there. The peasant and his family were in ecstasy, for it had been many months since they had tasted fresh meat. And so carried away was the peasant himself that when Thor looked away from his meal, he slyly cut into the bone of the goat leg he was eating and tasted the marrow. When the meal was finished, Thor wrapped up the bones and placed them outside the door, and the 2 goats settled down for the night. When morning came, Thor opened the door, and pulling aside his cloak, he set free the 2 goats which had been reborn. He noticed, however, that one of the goats was rather lame, and that his front right leg appeared to be damaged in some way, so that he found it difficult to walk. Thor was furious that his commands had not been so rashly discarded, and he realized that he would have to leave the goat behind, for it was too lame to travel. He thrust his great hammer into the air and was about to slaughter the entire family. But what the hell? When the peasant crept forward and confessed that he had been the one to eat the bone, he begged Thor to show clemency to his family, and grudgingly Thor agreed to take his 2 children, Thor agreed to take his 2 children, Theophily, as Theophily, is that Theophily, 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 carefully, Theophily. Theophily, a strong young boy, and Ruskva, 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 a pretty girl to be his lifelong servants as repayment. So the peasant was left with the goats, and the 4 set out on foot. The chariot left behind until the crippled goats could walk again. So the peasant was left with the goats, and the 4 set out on foot, the chariot left behind until the crippled goats could walk again. The countryside was cool and sparse. The water they could find to drink was tainted by the smell of the giants, and Thor became ill-tempered. Eventually, night began to fall, and they were forced to find a place in which to sleep. All of them was a great hall, and they approached it thankfully, curling up in its center to spend the night. They had not been sleeping for long. They had not been sleeping for long when there was a great banging and the earth began to rock and shake. The peasant's 2 children moaned with fear, but Thor pressed his hands over their mouths and bid them to follow him into an alcove, which led off to the side of the hall. There they huddled and at last slept. When morning dawned, the four weary travelers made their way from the hall and stopped with a start. For there lay sleeping a giant bigger than any they had seen before. His snores laid flat the sparse vegetation, and the peasants' children hurled themselves behind Thor in fright. Eventually, the giant opened one sleepy eye and caught sight of Thor and his party. He snorted and sat up, speaking in a loud, rumbling voice. So you are the ones who dared to make your camp in my mitten. And Thor looked around in surprise, and his eyes settled on the great hall in which they had managed to find shelter. The hall was none other than the giant's mitten. The alcove had been the thumb. Oh damn, like they're talking about an actual mitten, like a glove. The giant's so big they were in his glove. The alcove had been the thumb. Thor stepped forward and identified himself, and in return the giant said his name was Vasti. Vasti seemed a friendly giant, and he suggested that the two parties put together their provisions and travel on together. Thor agreed, for it would do them no harm to have an additional assistance. It would do them no harm to have the additional assistance of a giant should they encounter trouble on their travels. And so they set off, Thor, Loki, and the children scuttling along in the giant's footsteps. The day was long and difficult. Even the great Thor struggled to keep up with the immense strides of the giant. I mean, if they could sleep in his glove, that's one big giant. And when it came time to eat, and the rest, and to rest, he was grateful as the others. Vasti opened his sack and removed a large piece of meat, which he consumed in a few moments. He grunted and passed the sack to Thor, and then turned on his side and fell into a deep sleep. His noisy snores disrupting the landscape once again. I'm gonna do that over. The day was long and difficult. Even the great Thor struggled to keep up with the immense strides of the giant. And when it came time to eat and to rest, he was as grateful as the others. Vasti opened his sack and removed a large piece of meat, which he consumed in a few moments. He grunted and passed the sack to Thor, and then turned on his side and fell into a deep sleep. His noisy snores disrupting the landscape once again. Thor reached greedily for the bag. There had been no sustenance all day, and all four of them were weak with hunger. He struggled with the cord and stamped and shouted, but despite his greatest efforts, he was unable to unfasten the knots tied by Vasti. Loki then took an opportunity to weave his own magic on the knots, but they remained tightly fastened. Loki and the children settled down to sleep, too cold and hungry to bother any further, but Thor was irate. The giant's snoring made it impossible to sleep, and he was more hungry than he'd been since the day of his conception. Finally, he lifted up his great hammer and banged it down with all the force he could muster on the giant's head. Body? This man named Thor, yes? This man named Thor. Vasti turned and muttered and called out in his sleep that the leaf which had dropped on him was a nuisance. He compared Mjolnir striking him in the head with the full force of Thor to a leaf. Oh, but oh, that's hilarious. And then he fell back into a deep sleep and left Thor to gaze at him in astonishment. A few moments later, he tried again, this time invoking a series of enchantments to make his blow even more supremely powerful, and he hit past Vasti upon his brow, deep enough that the hammer was embedded in the giant's skull. Thor dragged it out and waited for the inevitable shriek of pain, but Vasti only turned again his sleep and complained about a bit of bark that must have fallen from the trees overhead. Imagine somebody's literally trying to kill you. Oh, it must be a leaf. Oh, it must be a branch. Oh, this is hilarious. This is hilarious. This is... Thor had never been so infuriated. Everyone knew that he was invincible, that his powers were stronger than any on earth, and yet, with his fine hammer, he was unable to make the slightest dent on the sleeping giant. He tried one last time, and when Vasily startled only slightly and suggested that perhaps an acorn had fallen upon his head, Thor gave up and tried to settle down for some sleep. I'm sorry, that's hilarious. That is hilarious. He slept not a wink that night, and then Vasti rose early on the morrow. He was in a fiery mood. Vasti had gone as far as he could with Thor and his men, and he would be traveling on his own home, and he would be traveling on to his own home across the icy mountains. He carefully pointed out the way to the castle of Utgard Loki, king of the giants, before he left. Vasti spoke quietly to the travelers and told them that they would find giants even larger than he was at the palace. Perhaps they should turn back now, he suggested, for he could not guarantee them their safety if they went on alone. But Thor was too fractious to listen to his warnings. Fractious. But Thor was too fractious to listen to his warnings, and they went on towards the palace. In a few short hours, they had arrived. The tiny size of the gods meant that it was easy for them to slip between the bars of the fence surrounding the castle. Soon enough, they made their way to the inner chambers and sanctuary of Utgard Loki himself. The king of the gods was, as Vasti had promised, larger than all giants, and fierce as countenance and an expression. He laughed uproariously when he saw Thor. "We have heard tales of you, Thor," he said, "and we know who you are by that red beard of yours. We didn't expect you to be so small." And with that, he broke out into laughter again, sending Thor into spasms of anger. Oh my god, he's gonna give Thor short man syndrome. This is hilarious. "My size is of no importance," he said stoutly, "for I am capable of feats that men of all sizes would find impossible." Loki, who had also suffered enough on their journey, leapt forward in Thor's defense. "We challenge you to beat our many talents," he shouted. "And to begin with, I challenge you to find someone in your ranks who can eat a meal more quickly than I can. Smart, so smart. Now Loki was more than confident of winning such a feat, for he had an appetite that was keener than most gods at the best of times. And here he was virtually starving after 2 days without food. The king nodded his head in assent and signaled to his cook, Logi, to join them. The table was laden with platters of bones, gravy, and huge slices of dripping meat. At the sound of a horn, Loki and Loki began to eat. Loki ate ravenously, devouring meat and gravy with gusto, enhanced by the powers he had called down to help him. At the sound of the horn, he stopped and looked around. The king pointed to the other end of the table, and Loki stopped in his tracks. For not only had Loki eaten all the meat and gravy at his side of the table, but he had eaten the bones and the platters and the table as well. Oh, this is so good. This is so good. But he had. The king pointed to the other end of the table, and Loki stopped in his tracks, for not only had Loki eaten all the meat and the gravy at his side of the table, but he had eaten the bones and platters and the table as well. Utgard Loki smiled contemptuously, and with a wave of his hand dismissed Loki, who hung his head in shame. Thor stepped forward next, and held up his hand for silence. I hereby challenge any man or giant to drink a greater draught than me. Anyone, he shouted. Anyone at all, he shouted. A horn was dragged before Thor, and Utgard Loki smiled once again. Your challenge, Thor, shall be met, he said. You see before you a horn which can, by your champion, be drunk in 1 or 2 great swallows. Let us see you match that. So Thor placed his mouth against the great vessel, which stretched the entire length of the room, and drawing in a deep breath, he began to drink. He sucked in the liquid, and after many moments without breathing, he stopped and crept along the table, and crept along the length of the horn to see how deeply he had drunk. The horn was full. The level of the drink had not moved by even the tiniest percentage. Thor shook his head in amazement. He knew his capacity for drinking was greater than anyone's, and yet he could not make any real dent in the contents of the horn. He swallowed again, and then spat on the floor. Salty, he muttered to himself and sat down. Utgard Loki just nodded his head and said quietly, one would have expected more from Thor, would they not? Thialfi had had enough of the taunting. He had grown to love Thor in the days they had been together, and he leapt quite quickly to his defense, volunteering himself for a race with the quickest of the giants. So Utgard Loki put forward his quickest man, a young giant called Hugi, and the 2 boys lined up and the race began. It seemed that the first race had been a draw, for both men appeared to reach the finish line at the same time, at the same moment. And so another race was called, and they lined up once again. As the bell went, and as Thialfi lifted his foot to set off in the direction of the finish, Hugi raced to the line and back. The race was over, and this time there was no question of who had won. Well, said Utgard Loki, roaring with laughter. There are not many tricks to your trade, are there, Thor? To which the angry god trembled, but said nothing. What do you say? Shouted Utgard Loki. winking furiously at the crowd of giants who had arrived to witness the spectacle. You try to raise our pretty kitty. He pointed to a giant cat who reclined gracefully in the corners of the hall. Thor's pride had taken a beating, and he was determined to prove himself. Surely it could not be difficult to lift the cat. He strode purposefully towards the cat, who yawned and licked her paw before sitting up. He tightened his belt, making cured, Meg incured, Megincured. He tightened his belt, Megincured, which had made him stronger, and then he tugged and pulled at the cat with all his might. But only one paw was lifted from the ground, and despite his every effort, he could not move her. The cat batted him playfully with the paw he'd managed to lift, and laid back once again, her tail flicking to and fro in the sunlight. Thor looked towards Utgartuluki and asked for one final challenge. Said the king. There's one person in my household who may be suitable to wrestle with you. May I introduce to you my nurse, the 100-year-old Ellie. There was a great laughter amongst the crowd as Ellie crept forward, hardly able to hold herself upright. Thor moved quickly towards her and pulled and shoved until Utgartuluki called for him to stop. Thor swallowed with difficulty. He was bewildered and he was furious. He stared at Utgartuluki and said quietly, I have been beaten. Until this day, I thought there was no one greater than I. You have shown me my place, and for that I must respect you. Thor signaled to Thialfi. Thor signaled to Thialfi. Thor signaled to Thialfi and Roskva, and with Loki on one arm, they made to leave the hall, defeated and humiliated. But Utgartuluki called out in a voice that was at once humane and conciliatory. You have come here today against my will, he said proudly. This is our home, and you are not welcome here. Your show of strength is not welcome here, and I was forced to do something to keep you away forever. At that, the giant transformed, and in an instant, he was Vasti. Do you recognize me? He said. When I lay sleeping just last night, I took the precaution of placing a mountain over my head, one which was invisible to you, Thor. What? I messed that up. But Utgartuluki called out in a voice that was once humane and conciliatory. You have come here today against my will, he said proudly. This is our home, and you are not welcome here. Your show of strength is not welcome here. I was forced to do something to keep you away forever. At that, the giant transformed, and in an instant he was Vasti. Do you recognize me? He said. While I lay sleeping last night, I took the precaution of placing a mountain over my head, one which was invisible to you, Thor. And it is just as well, for it seems that when you were unable to open the magic cord of my sack, you took it upon yourself to hit the mountain. There he paused, and casting open a curtain, gesticulated out the window at a series of valleys surrounding the mountain on the horizon. Those valleys, he said solemnly, are the blows you aimed to my head. Thor gasped, but said nothing, waiting for the king to continue. And continue he did. Loki's opponent had been none other than Wildfire, and Thiaphili's racing partner had been the king's thoughts, and there could be none as swift as these. Nah, my voice starting to give out, and my lips starting to get dry, and I'm starting to make more mistakes. Thor gasped, but said nothing, waiting for the king to continue. And continue he did. Loki's opponent had been none other than Wildfire, and Thiaphili's racing partner had been the king's thoughts, and there could be none as swift as these. Thor's drinking horn had been dipped at the one end into the ocean, and no matter how deeply he drank, the ocean would have remained undrinkable. Utgard Loki commented that the tides of the ocean had been altered by Thor's great swallows. Throat goat Thor. But then he hurriedly went on. The cat was in reality Jormungandr, the world serpent, and had Thor not heard the grasp of terror, when it seemed as though Thor may be responsible for removing the serpent's tail from its mouth. Everyone there knew that what chaos would exist when such an occurrence would happen, for it had been prophesied that the end of the world would be nigh. Heli was old age itself, and he had nearly unseated her. In all, Thor had been successful in many ways. "You may hold your head high," said Utgard-Loki proudly, "but please, Thor, do not return to our shores." Thor was only slightly placated by the king's explanations, and he lifted his powerful hammer to bring to an end the sedate lifestyle of Utgard-Loki and his men. But as quickly as he could lift his hammer, the castle was enveloped in a sea of mist, and he could see nothing. Wait, this man was literally about to genocide because his pride was bruised. Bruh. But as quickly as he could lift his hammer, the castle was enveloped in a sea of mist, and he could see nothing. The world of the giants was completely enshrouded, and Thor had no recourse but to return home to Asgard. His mission was incomplete, and Thor had been branded a puny weakling in the eyes of the giant. But he had faced many of nature's most formidable enemies and had left his mark, and for that the god of war could stand tall once again. I think I'm going to end it there because we've crossed an hour. That last story was rather long. Thank you for joining me. I hope that this could have been a relaxing experience for you. I hope it was enjoyable. I hope you're probably asleep. I really hope you're asleep. I would love knowing that these videos could help someone relax and have a good night's rest. So, copying one of my favorite ASM artists, good morning, good day, good night, wherever you may be. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.